legend Lee Munson of Portfolio Wealth Advisors joining us now live from Albuquerque to give us his take on crazy October thus far. Hey, Lee, first of all, before we dive into the markets, we've been talking about President Trump, these new comments to Fox Business, beating up on Jay Powell again. Are you paying attention to these at all? Do you care at all that these two seem to be like that?
I mean, do I care? Not really, because Powell runs his own show. I mean, when you see him do interviews, he acts like a normal guy running the biggest central bank on the planet. You know what I like about Powell? He's a first-class act. When they say, well, do you talk to the president? No. You know, like, do you go to the White House all the time, chit-chat? No. And then when he gets those little gotcha things where we want to have him nod and wink, we want to have Powell kind of wink at us and say, yeah, I know what the deal is. He refuses to stoop that low. So I don't need Powell giving a nod or wink to people like us or in the media saying, I know this guy's a little bit crazy. I don't want him to say any of that. I want him to be, because that would be the biggest threat. If Trump can get Powell to get brought into this Twitterverse crap, then we have a problem. Powell's first class not going to do it. I think Trump just shows that he doesn't have a plan for the economy. I think it just shows that he's out of touch. And I think that that should be worrisome to U.S. investors. This guy doesn't know a clue of what's going on. And I think that all Trump's got is this trade cut thing. It's not trade cut, excuse me, the tax cut.
Hey, I don't want to go all political with you, but isn't he just talking his book? I mean, he needs low rates.
He needs no. He's talking his book. My God, this man has had 30 years of rates going one direction, and he's in real estate. I mean, if I had a market that only went one way for 30 years, you think I'd do anything not to, like, try to grab and claw and say just one more day? So I get it. It's just the American people don't understand that. That's not a political thing. That's the damn truth.
Okay, let's talk about the market right now. Roller coaster ride, steep sell-off last week. We are seeing a big rally right now. S&P 500, 2,800, talking about the Dow going to 26,000 again. What are you doing here? Did you go in? Did you nibble? Did you nibble last week before this rally?
Well, I did my nibbling earlier this week, and most of my nibbling was done in August. So I got the prices I want. I think that one could say, or you could look at last week as a decent time to sort of get back in if you didn't have exposure. Remember, I'm buying in that crash, or not, sort of this mini crash that we had early in February. So I was buying, hundreds of points lower. So I'm just sort of sitting there happy. I wouldn't be in these U.S. stocks, Jen. I'm not, I understand the NASDAQ has done well. I think this stuff is going to do well through the end of the year. However, I think people should be nibbling either on individual names that are beat up, or they need to be nibbling in that international emerging area where we still have a 10 to 15% discount. Because if it's going to work in the U.S., we're going to have to get global growth. I mean, 75% of GDP is not in the U.S. 60% of GDP purchase power parity are in emerging economies, not even the U.S. plus Europe plus whatever. There's a problem. Look at that chart on the emerging markets, right? That looks like something I'm interested in. That chart represents 60% of what people can buy. That chart represents a lot of global growth. And let me explain to a second grader what's going on. A lot of emerging market companies finance in US dollars. This has been the case ever since the early 80s. This is not new. This is not different. So when the dollar spikes, it causes a rumble in the debt servicing of emerging economies. Everybody knows it, and that's why we've seen this decline. So what we have to ask, is this new? No. When your stockbroker calls and says, oh, I heard the dollar's causing emerging to be a problem. It's like, I know, since 1980, we've been tracking this thing. So I say you use the known information, look at this known issue, and you go grip it and rip it.
Hey, Lee, on days like we saw last week, we certainly know there's a lot more people on our site. Are you getting more calls from clients over the last, say, 5 trading days?
So last week was when the call started, right? And here's what the calls are. They'll say, why aren't we only in the NASDAQ? And why do we invest any place outside of momentum tech stocks, right? And there are newer clients that are calling me, and not to throw anybody under the bus, because I only have a handful, the clients calling me being worried about catching up or what's going on, they're the same people back in January that wanted to buy all the emerging stuff because the emerging markets were up 35% last year. And so I feel for these clients. They're usually newer clients with me, but they are concerned about the US. They don't understand why it's rising so high. They feel the fear of missing out on this big tech run. And they don't understand, with reckless abandon, I have to remind them why we want to have a globally diversified portfolio. Because if you look in the last decade, the S&P didn't do anything, right? And so those are the conversations I'm having, right?
Lee, Dan Roberts here. We've got the closing bell in a minute, but really quick, I'd love to get your take on the Uber news. We saw a big journal story about Uber's IPO, supposedly $120 billion valuation. We were all debating it. What do you think about Uber once it goes public?
Man, I'm on the fence. You know me. You're expecting, Dan, for me to say it's too pricey, don't buy it, let it go down half. But I have to tell you guys, it's not that I'm necessarily going to buy this for my clients, but you start to think, how much do I use Uber? I use Uber all the time. Think how many people are going to be using Uber next week in tomorrow in Canada as they're stoned out of their minds, right? So I use it. I think my judgment is colored, but bottom line, I think it's going to be another Facebook. Long term, I think they dominate. But I'd rather see this IPO soften and kind of see where it could land. And then maybe it's like, having Facebook at $20 a share after the IPO. That's my narrative.
All right, Lee Munson, we got to let you go. We got to do the bell. Thank you so much for sharing your narrative with us today.